little is known about the Birmingham Suffragettes, yet they included some of the most charismatic and provocative personalities of the legendary political movement. These women carried out many outrageous, dangerous and daring protests.
Quick! Just do what I do.
The main campaign for women's votes, the Birmingham Women's Suffrage Society, was established here at 10 Chad Road in Edgbaston on the 21st of April 1868.
Shall I open a window? Is it terribly stuffy?
Have we got pens and paper?
Is someone taking notes? I think they should.
At first, the movement was dominated by prominent Liberals living in Edgbaston, who all favoured the same causes and mixed in the same social circles. But this was to change dramatically as the movement progressed.
Yes, it's a shock. Everyone says it. They were ladies, very pretty to look at. What happened?
By the end of the 19th century, almost 60% of adult males could vote, but women were still no further on in their fight for the vote on the same terms as men as they had been in the 1860s.
I'd say it started for real with the Pankhursts. 1903, the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU, had been formed by Emmeline Pankhurst and her two daughters, Christabel and Sylvia, at their home in Manchester. This was to be a women-only organisation initially connected to the Independent Labour Party, of which Emmeline Pankhurst was a member. It would campaign, like the National Union of Women's Suffragette Societies, the NUWSS, for votes for women on the same basis as men. All well and good. Anyone's free to campaign in my book. But there was a problem. The Pankhursts were not happy with the parliamentary route. Private members' bills were happening on a yearly basis, but Emmeline Pankhurst saw these as a waste of time. And that's when it all changed. Mrs. Pankhurst decided more forceful action was required, and they coined this phrase, deeds, not words. That was their campaign slogan. That tells you everything it was about to become, all about doing and not saying.
Large meetings were held here in Birmingham's Town Hall. In addition to this, many Birmingham suffragettes travelled to London to take part in demonstrations where they attempted to confront MPs and also the Prime Minister, Asquith. The women of Birmingham were clearly becoming more organised, mobilised, and were getting angrier. In 1906, the Daily Mail had coined the word suffragette as a derogatory phrase intended to distinguish these new militants from their constitutional counterparts.
This newspaper is dedicated to the brave women who today are fighting for freedom. To all women down the ages who kept the flag flying and looked forward to this day without seeing it. To all women all over the world, whatever their race, creed or calling, whether they be with us in this fight or against us.
These suffragettes were a new, younger generation. Women like Bertha Ryland and Hilda Burkitt were becoming frustrated with the slow pace of change. These wealthy and intelligent women were not rash, impatient young girls, but women who had been involved in the campaign for a number of years and were now determined to go further than their predecessors.
You could see it coming. Didn't surprise me. There had been that protest in Parliament in 1905, and then Christabel Pankhurst and Annie Kenney disrupted a Liberal Party meeting at Manchester's Free Trade Hall, and they were arrested. And then it all kicked off. The beginning of militant action or civil disobedience, all in the pursuit of prison sentences.
One simple corrugated inner. I got this from the bull ring this morning. You rip it to the right length for your body and save a few bits for your arms too. Admittedly, it looks a bit, well, silly, but it works. Firstly, it stops the policeman hurting you so much when they kick you. But most importantly, it stops the policeman getting such a tight grip on you in the first place, which means you can get away. And it is all about getting away.
By now, they'd started putting them away for their antics in prison. Didn't seem to make a blind bit of difference. They were at it everywhere, holding open meetings in factories. Cadbury girls were wearing suffragette badges as they worked. One of the big problems was that towards the end of 1908, Birmingham got a new organiser, Gladys Keevil. Posh, well-educated, very confident young lady. Big trouble.
This is her. She's already been arrested and imprisoned. She was made a WSPU organiser shortly after her release, and then appointed to become Midlands organiser in September. In June, she organised the demonstration in London's Hyde Park at which over 250,000 people were present. Now, she's with us, organising our meetings.
In July, the Birmingham WSPU held a most successful meeting here at Small Heath Park gates, where hundreds of people collected and listened with great attention for over an hour and a half. They collected lots of money and even sold out of copies of Votes for Women.
Asquith at the town hall. How could I ever forget? That was all down to Miss Keevil too. She organised it, the protest, if you could call it that, because towards the end of the meeting, Keevil actually approached him. She went right up to our British Prime Minister, running up the hall as the crowd were clapping.
She demanded to know the Prime Minister's plans for women's suffrage this session, and then she offered him a copy of our newspaper, Votes for Women.
Votes for women!
Votes for women!
Votes for women, votes for women. It was just like that. Cue outrage. Did we arrest them? No. Should we have done? All I know is that Keevil was very proud of that. Of course she was. She was able to publicly approach the Prime Minister, get her face in the papers, and become talk of the town, and get away with it. It's what they want. Attention, they admit it. One of those at the protest was Bertha Ryland.
What is now the ICC was once the site of Bingley Hall, an exhibition centre, where in 1909 Asquith addressed a meeting about the budget. Birmingham women who had been refused entry to the meeting had a plan.
We'd been instructed to deal very carefully with them at Bingley Hall and not to use any violence that was not necessary. I want to make that clear from the start. But we were very well prepared. We had 59 sergeants, 495 constables on foot, and 20 on horseback on duty in the city that evening. Naturally, members of the WSPU tried to gain entry to the hall, but were prevented from doing so by the heavy police presence. Each man entering the hall was carefully scrutinised in case any woman attempted to gain entry whilst dressed as a man. But they did that, dressed as men.
Suddenly, in the middle of the meeting, there was a sound of splintering glass.
Down with Asquith!
2 windows of the outer office of Bingley Hall had been broken by the women in the house opposite.
There were dozens of us rushing into the house. Tumbling over each other we were to get the 2 women out, where they were immediately arrested. Outside the hall, 6 other women made repeated attempts to break through the barriers, and one of them came flourishing a hammer. The trouble was that these women returned as often as they were taken away, and that wasn't the worst of it. Oh no, they were only just getting started. Bloody hell, you should have heard them scream.
Quick! I see him, he's coming! Where?
There, that's him, that's his car!
Down with Asquith! Votes for women now!
Liberty or death!
Hey!
They actually hit Mr. Asquith's motorcar. They attacked the Prime Minister.
After the Bingley Hall incident, Hilda Burkett was taken here to Winson Green Prison, and what happened next was to change the course of the movement.
Hilda Burkett did 3 hunger strikes, each lasting for 81 hours, 96 hours and 24 hours. This is what the record says. On arriving at the prison, she refused to take off her clothes or to take any food. She stated to him, the doctor, that she wished to send a petition to the Home Secretary to be placed in the 1st Division. That allowed them to be recognised a political prisoner and to be afforded special privileges. On Tuesday afternoon, she was taken into the hospital kitchen. There were 2 doctors, 4 wardresses, and matron. They forced her to sit in a chair and tried to wrap a blanket around her. A struggle then ensued, but she was eventually overpowered by the wardresses and held in the chair.
I will not take food. I refuse. I will not.
Her lips were forced open and food poured from a feeding cup through the crevices of her teeth, which remained closed. She did not swallow any, and after half an hour they gave it up. She was now fearfully weak. The prison doctor then said, "Well, illegal or not, I'm going to use it." The nasal tube was then forced up, but she coughed it back twice. Then more food was forced down by 1 doctor and 2 wardresses in a new way. The doctor stood behind, pushed the patient into a reclining position, caught hold of her throat, then forced the feeding cup into her mouth. She had very great pain at night. She only slept 4 nights out of the whole month.
In her petition to be classed as a political prisoner, Hilda wrote, "I am ready to lay down my life to bring about the freedom of my sex." There is a sense of inevitability about Hilda's statement, an acceptance that this was to be her life now as a militant suffragette, fully devoted to the cause and to the leadership of Christabel and Emmeline Pankhurst. While the women were incarcerated, demonstrations outside the prison took place every evening.
Since the suffragette imprisonments, members have organised a meeting in the Bullring every evening. We have met with a great deal of sympathy, especially among the working women.
Momentum was gathering. The protesters didn't only go to Winson Green Prison, but they also came here, to a house on the Soho Road. This was the home of William Cassels, the Deputy Medical Officer at Winson Green Prison. The WSPU besieged his house. They stuck posters on the windows and threw stones at the building. They also carried out demonstrations in front of the house, shouting slogans like, "Who tortures women in prison?"
The doctors had police protection night and day. We had 40 police drafted into Birmingham, and another 40 came soon after. The suffragettes were holding up to 50 meetings a day across the city, chalking protests against torture at Winson Green on the pavements.
Things had changed. There was now a belief that constitutional change was possible if only Asquith could be defeated at the general election.
The women could sense change in the air, and in the run-up to the election, they were getting dangerously excited.
But despite the suffragettes' best attempts, Asquith was re-elected. And there was further anger when he introduced a manhood suffrage bill, which increased the numbers of male voters but deliberately excluded female voters.
I put all that down to the pamphlet Broken Windows. Christabel Pankhurst, Broken Windows, published in 1912. In here, she declared that the message of the broken pane is that women are determined that the lives of their sisters shall no longer be broken.
And that those that have to obey the law shall have a voice in saying what that law shall be. Repression cannot break the spirit of liberty.
And so it follows that on March the 8th, 1912, some familiar names were committed for trial in London. Bertha Ryland and Maud Smith were arrested, along with Gladys Hazel, who was a teacher at King Edward's School in Birmingham. Dorothy Evans, who had replaced Gladys Keevil as Midlands organiser, and Hilda Burkitt for smashing the windows of commercial properties in and around Old Bond Street.
The May 10th issue of Votes for Women included an article titled "Torture in English Prisons." Bertha and Maud both served much of their sentences here at Winson Green Prison, and so it's possible that the article refers to one of them. From the Birmingham prison comes grave reports of a suffragist shamefully and brutally treated. She has been forcibly fed for 3 weeks and fed while in irons for 24 hours. 6 heavy wardresses set on her and handcuffed her hands behind her back. She was kept hidden away so that the other women in prison should know nothing of what was going on. But this news report writes of the prisoners that it is understood that they are simply amusing themselves or passing the time away knitting, sewing or crocheting.
Whereas the leaders of the Women's Social and Political Union, Mrs. Pankhurst and Mr. and Mrs. Pethick Lawrence, have now received their rights as political offenders and have been placed in the First Division, I hereby claim that all the women who are at present suffering imprisonment for this same cause, including myself, should receive the same treatment and be at once placed in the First Division, as we are all imprisoned for the same object, namely to obtain the enfranchisement of women.
At the end of June, a phone call was made from the prison to the Home Office to report that Hilda had been in hospital under observation for the past 6 weeks. She is mentally very unstable, but physically she is all right. She has been refusing food, and the doctor recommends that owing to her doubtless hysterical condition, she should not be forcibly fed, but released immediately.
Golf courses were attacked and church services were disrupted. There was even an attempt to burn down Handsworth Boathouse. The Carnegie Library, which stood on this site, was set ablaze. And they also left a copy of Christabel Pankhurst's pamphlet, The Great Scourge and How to End It, along with another note which read, "To start your new library." But the most dramatic events were still to come. On the same night as the Carnegie Library, an unexploded bomb was found at Moor Green Hall, the uninhabited residence of the late Arthur Chamberlain, brother of Joseph. Caretakers were looking after the house and found a piece of iron gas piping about a foot long, which was attached to a photographic lamp with a candle at the end of it. There was explosive powder found inside the pipe, although the candle had gone out before it could detonate. Female footprints were also found in the grounds of the building, and alongside this there was a note which was addressed to Mr. McKenna at the Home Office. The note read, "Militancy is not dead, but if you are not, you soon will be."
The militant suffragettes of Birmingham have, during the weekend, added to their list of outrages by completely disfiguring the interior of the Cathedral Church of St. Philip. No part of the building was sacred to the women. Nave, baptistry and chancel, walls, floors, furniture and stained glass were daubed with white enamel. The attack is evidently the handiwork of a number of women.
Revenge was promised by a group calling themselves the Mysterious 50. They threatened to cut off the women's hair, to disfigure them using acid, and also to tar and feather them. But all this angry public outcry couldn't stop momentum building towards another outrageous suffragette protest.
Christ says, "I come not to bring peace, but a sword."
On the 9th of June, Bertha Ryland entered Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery. She approached a painting known as Master Thornhill, painted by the well-known 18th century artist George Romney, slashing the canvas 3 times.
Their last act was the burning down of a house in Yardley in protest against forcible feeding. Then they were all released. Because of the war starting, all their sentences cancelled.
In 1917, the House of Commons voted by 387 to 57 in favour of the Women's Clause in the Representation of the People Bill.
Women over 30 who were householders, wives of householders, occupiers of property of £5 or more annual value, or university graduates, could now vote.
In 1928, women were finally given the franchise on equal terms with men.
Now all citizens, male and female, aged over 21 years, could vote in general elections.
As long as you have a vote, you must use it, and use it carefully.
Freedom, the voice of the Lord.